Hello everyone, welcome back to On the Ledger. This is your host Mul Sayed, and I'm back once again on your weekly rendezvous from Paris. This is one of those fascinating episodes that I've honestly been looking forward to for a while, because it combines everything that I like and that we like about the NFT space: technology, art, and community. Today, we're talking about generative art. Although generative art existed way before blockchain technology, last year has seen NFTs enable groundbreaking artists and their innovative expressions to gain access to whole new audience groups and monetization mechanics. And that was beyond the conventional boundaries of the art world. It's kind of a symbiotic experience between artist, code, and collectors. And one cannot talk about generative art without mentioning Artblocks. Artblocks is leading a new generation of art through its platform. The project, created by Erick Calderon, aka Snowfro, in early 2021, has generated hundreds of millions of dollars and gave birth to collections that you probably already know, such as Squiggles, Fidenzas, or Rangers, who've already marked cryptoculture and expanded its boundaries. Today we have the man himself on the show, Snowfro, founder of Artblocks and creator of the Squiggles. He'll be joined by Ledger's Chief Experience Officer, whom you already know, and who's also a big generative art aficionado and collector, Ian Rogers. Together, they'll explore the history, present, and future of Artblocks and the generative art space. So fasten your seatbelts and enjoy the conversation.
Honestly, it's really an honor not only to have you on our show, but just to be able to have a conversation with you generally. And I was going to open in maybe what seems like a strange way, but I promise it has a landing point. I remember this transition for myself, from kind of stadium rock to punk rock, right? Like I my first concerts were things like Kiss and AC/DC. And then I remember, going to Chicago with a friend when I was 15 years old, and Henry Rollins, who was at the time kind of like the guy from Black Flag, was the quote unquote headliner at a small bar in Chicago. And during the opening bands, Henry Rollins is like standing next to us in the crowd. And that to me was this like transition from like stadium rock to punk rock, realizing that we were all like part of the same community. And it wasn't about, kind of people up there on pedestals and, but it was actually a community. And there's something about, the world of NFTs and in particular generative art that brings back those same feelings for me, like being able to have a conversation with you, and, sitting next to MP Cause when we minted at Bright Moments in Berlin, having a conversation about skateboarding with Tyler Hobbs, collecting artists on Tezos, and then having conversations with them on Twitter immediately after. It feels like punk rock to me. So, anyway, thank you for being with us.
That's awesome, man.
And for being accessible.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm super humbled to be a part of this too. So thank you.
No, thanks for being, who you are in this movement. So let's get to that. I think Mo does a great job with his podcast and always really keeps it basic for the audience. So just as a starting point, what is generative art?
Generative art actually has roots in what I'd consider algorithmic art. Algorithmic art is the idea that you use code to create a visual or an audio output. You use code to create. And when you use code to create, you're very deliberate about you have to give the computer instructions. And if you give the computer a certain set of instructions, it's going to produce a certain thing. And your success, and I'm not talking about aesthetically, is based on whether the computer does what you intend it to do originally. Generative art is taking that into consideration, but then also taking into consideration that there's a lot of things that by just changing slight things like little variables in the algorithm, you can have dramatically different results. And so giving the computer or giving random a little bit of say in what that final output is. So if you take an algorithm that just, every time you run it, it spits out a blue screen, that's great. If you maybe don't care what the background is, and you set that algorithm to randomly pick the color of the screen. So if I press refresh, it's going to be red. And then if I press refresh again, it'll be green and then red again. That is at the very basic level what generative art is the idea that you add variability to a set of code instructions for producing visual outputs.
I think it's great to set up with that, because I think that when we think about, I think that sort of digital art is a big hurdle for people that haven't been in the space, and then generative art is sort of one step further. They have to understand kind of what is the craft, in other words. And this is something that I find. I just spent 5 years in the luxury world, where a craft is maybe making wine, maybe making a leather handbag. And what I'm always pointing out to my friends in that world is that it's actually the same. It's just as absurd to kill a cow, color its skin, cut it into shapes, and sew it together into a leather bag that you sell at the Dior store. But it is also it is a craft that's been honed in some cases for tens or even hundreds of years. What in your mind is the craft of generative art?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of different things. So number one, math, understanding math, and exercising math, right? It's one thing. I mean, I remember growing up, and there was certain math classes where I'd be like, I'm never going to use this shit, and things like geometry, I hated. I was so good at algebra. I was so good at like trig and all that stuff, but geometry, I was just terrible at it. And now, as I try to develop, my work as an artist, which I rarely have time to do, I find myself more and more wishing that I understood geometry. So understanding like math is actually pretty critical, and that is a skill that little by little you craft, especially in the generative space, because it's not as intuitive as you might think to generate shapes onto a screen, especially organic shapes, and really crafting the ability for you to be able to create visually compelling geometric or mathematical shapes on screen using instructions with code, I think is something that takes a lot of effort refining and guess and check, because it feels it's very deliberate when you just want to draw a circle to the screen. And that's something that we all start with, right? Like that might be the first thing that we do, is we might just like make sure that the screen creates a circle, and that's easy. But then once you start making something a little bit more high tech, you really have to work towards that. Then you have to add composition on top of that, and character, and some interest to the piece. And so crafting composition is very similar to just how an artist has to craft composition when they compose a painting or they compose a photograph. Understanding composition is something that comes with experience generally. Some people are just gifted with understanding composition. And then I think something that's really special in a generative art piece is then the interactivity layer, which is not a requirement, or the animation or the interactivity. That's not actually a requirement, but being able to craft how all of those things come together into a visually compelling output is something that just takes, in my opinion, years to put together. And once you do that, the results are pretty clear. That there's a lot of people in this world that will say that digital art doesn't have any soul to it. Well, it is harder to communicate soul from a digital artwork, especially to the contemporary art world. If you are able to generate soul out of something digital, in my opinion, you are demonstrating like an execution of those skills to the fullest potential. And I feel very proud to have hosted a lot of artwork on Artblocks and seen a lot of artwork in this generative art space that truly effectively communicates soul and is a reflection of like the pure craftsmanship of what people are putting into this work.
I love this conversation. I actually would love to go a little further on this. I feel like we should give the audience a bit more background on you and Artblocks, but I want to just continue on this as a starting point, because I think for someone to jump in, maybe their first question is, what is this and why should I care? And, when I hear you talk about this, I'm super curious to know how you evaluate, the art that the generative art that you see. And, you're telling us a bit about that, but also the thing that I really see here is that, this is a craft, no question, as you're, kind of laying out what the elements are and what it takes to be good at this craft, and that it does also take, probably a lifetime of prerequisites, right? Whether that's, math and coding, but also just kind of the sensitivities and trial and error and experimentation and exactly what artists do when they're creating art. But also it's something that the appreciation of will change over time. And this is actually a thing that really caused me to get conviction about generative art, is because I was spending enough time in it personally to begin to appreciate it. And I say begin to appreciate it in the way that you're describing. And then I was also experiencing people who just couldn't even understand how something digital could be craft. And that was like a big light bulb for me, because I went, that's a barrier that future generations won't have. It will be obvious that this is art and this is craft, and therefore, the kind of seminal artists in this space who have created this space will actually, become more and more appreciated, because more and more people will simply understand the medium, right? So, let's do just a little bit of history. Like, people think that generative art started with NFTs, but that's not true. So where did this begin?
I think the first examples of algorithmic art were actually just scientists demonstrating some really beautiful patterns in nature. You have people like Herbert Franke in Germany early on, working with light, and then later on Vera Molnar and Manfred Moore with plotters, and actually starting to take it a little bit more towards writing algorithms for the purpose of creating a visual output. This is all late 60s, early 1970s. In the 1970s, actually, there was a lot of incredible work being created by computers just as people started having access to the computer. And you have to understand that access to a computer in the 1970s is very, very, very different, like almost like ununderstandably different than what it is today. Like, you almost can't even imagine what it is to like sign up to walk into a big, cold, sterile room that you are sitting there for like a few hours in the presence of this huge machine that's making noise that you don't even get to like get direct feedback from immediately, right? So like, I had this really nice opportunity to interview Vera Molnar by text earlier this month, and I asked her what it was like, and she's like, you didn't even know if what you fed the computer, because you were using punch cards, was going to be right immediately. It wasn't until the introduction of the screen that gave you immediate feedback, and some of these artists were creating art before there was even a screen to look at what they were typing. And so it's just insane to know that even when we didn't have the facility that we have now, there was this desire to create visual, back then mainly just visual. I don't know of any like audio examples in the time, although I may just not be educated enough, but visual desire to make visual outputs using this dinosaur of a machine. There was something really interesting there for the human to interact with this robot and create something. And there's a huge distinction between generative art and AI art, where like the machine actually has some creative space, whereas with generative art, it's very deliberate and intentional. You may be surprised with what the computer creates for you, because you may not be able to fully process all of the different variables that are happening at the same time, but it's very deliberate. You can follow a set of instructions and end up exactly where you're going to end up, versus AI, where it feels very much like a surprise, even to the people that are programming these models.
And do you have a preference, Eric? Like, is AI art as interesting to you as algorithmic art?
I am fascinated with AI art. I don't understand it, and I understand it, but I haven't had in the last year and a half, what I'm seeing come out from AI algorithms is completely mind-boggling, and I haven't had the luxury of the time to like. The way I operate is I like to just dive in, and I go in deep, and I want to know and I want to understand, and all I'm seeing is scrolling on Twitter seeing these incredible images, so I don't actually understand like the mechanics exactly of what's going on, but I'm fascinated by it and I love it. I am a huge fan of generative art. I am a bit of a control freak. I would be willing, I don't want to generalize, but I would be willing to say that a lot of generative artists or algorithmic artists can be a little bit of a control freak. I mean, I think that's the whole thing, is you're wrangling this thing to do what you want it to do. And, you know, why? Because if I wanted to just do that one thing one time, maybe I could actually do it with a pen and paper, or I could do it on Photoshop. But the beauty of generative art is that you can create art for a number of people at one time with one single algorithm, and then have that computer, using variability, spread all of that out amongst a larger audience, a larger group of people. So, you know, anyways,
I think it's interesting, because I think that also, you know, it's important maybe for the audience to understand that there is a bright line of sorts between you know, algorithmic or generative art and AI art, and there, you know, and it's also, if anything, it just shows that there's a lot to explore, and we're just
and they're very different. I mean, they're night and day. They're both digital mediums. They're both require an incredible amount of creativity. You know, right now you have one person that creates an AI, well, one team, let's say, that creates an AI algorithm, and now you have like this poetic nature of creating the prompts that generate the AI outputs, and like that has becoming a skill that people are honing in and of itself. It's really beautiful to watch it. So just from the surface, watching it on Twitter, because that's literally the only place that I get to keep up with this, it's really fun to watch. And I fully intend on being able to support AI type artwork, not necessarily on Artblocks proper, as we want to fully celebrate this concept of generative instruction-based art, but using our infrastructure and what we've built, you know, from the very beginning, we've been wanting to make sure that we'll eventually be flexible enough to be able to host AI outputs as, you know, generative, or as NFTs in the future.
And I'm really going to have a hard time keeping us to time here, because there's so much I want to ask you. I'm curious, again, just on the basics. You know, what did, you know, the world of digital scarcity and NFTs add to this world, right? We've, you know, as we're pointing out, you know, generative art and NFTs are not the same thing, right? You can do generative art or algorithmic art or even AI art without the concept of, you know, without Satoshi's white paper and the concept of digital scarcity and NFTs. So what, in your view, does this concept of digital scarcities add to this equation?
With algorithmic art, generally, with generative art, you know, the artists would code in their studio or in their home, and they would produce outputs. They would very much curate, hand select the things that they wanted to present. Generative art existed on super rare and known origin since the beginning of the NFT world. It just might not even have been tagged as generative art. It is just art. It is an artist that creates a composition on the screen that they believe has artistic value enough for someone to be interested in acquiring it as something that they want to see in their home or on their phone, depending on how we display our art, which is, you know, a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. The concept of scarcity was essentially creating a cap for what's seemingly a limitless number of outputs that an algorithm can produce. There are, if I'm not mistaken, trillions of possible chromie squiggles in this world, but to make it a palpable, human, understandable edition of art, it has been capped to 10,000. The Fidenzas algorithm, the Ringer's algorithm, all of the pieces on Artblocks could probably produce billions, trillions, if not more, potential outputs. But capping it is what creates the addition, the body of work. This is Fidenza, and it is these 999 outputs. This is it. This is the artist being forced to craft their algorithm way more intensely than when they are at home getting to curate and select their work. It is the artist basically being willing to give up control to get their algorithm to the point that it needs to get to where they are willing to give up control of the next 999 outputs. And those 999 outputs are forever stored and, you know, maintained as the final body of work of that algorithm. And that is where digital scarcity has played such a huge part in what's happening with generative art. Generative art has existed forever. In fact, there was a wonderful generation of artists even in the last 10 years. A lot of the artists that have found significant success on Artblocks today have been crafting generative algorithms for a decade or even more. In fact, that's a huge inspiration for a lot of the art that I had created in the past was, people that were creating generative stuff. And that was something that caused me this like desire to build Artblocks, was that I would see these artists post on Twitter, Reddit, or Instagram, these like ephemeral images, knowing that tomorrow there would be another one, and knowing that there was no other than Instagram conservation of like this beautiful piece of work that they made the day before. And, this desire to kind of eternalize individual outputs in a way that really wasn't possible before the advent of NFTs. I mean, yeah, they could store them on their hard drive and make sure that as their computers got old, they took out the hard drive or backed it up to a thumb drive, or maybe you have I have a drawer full of like 7 old hard drives with pictures from when I started college to now, with documents and maybe even like software that I downloaded. That's not a way to share art, to experience art, to think about like art being forgotten like that, I think is really crushing. And then, the idea that now we have this technical way of preserving it, and then also creating a limitation in the total edition size, and by doing so, forcing the artist to really grind that algorithm to produce what they want, I think is this is what we're experiencing. This is a new way of creating digital art. Algorithmic art has existed forever. Generative art has existed forever. But under these very strict circumstances and guidelines, this is a new way of doing it that has, I think, forced artists to really elevate what they're doing. And I think the results have been really beautiful.
I really love that description, and you're touching on something that I think very few appreciate. I feel like I have an appreciation for what you just said, partly because I went on tour with the Beastie Boys in 1995 and took a ton of digital photos with an Apple, I think it was called a Quick Take camera. I think it basically shot 640, 480. I think it was the first time that anyone had like walked out on stage and taken a photo and then immediately walked backstage and connected a modem to the internet and put images on a website.
It's amazing.
At the same time, I've lost every single one of those images somewhere along the way. And I think that people don't quite yet grasp the fact that the blockchains will outlive us. And so when you said eternalize, even for me now, I'm starting to take just the photos that I take and mint them and drop them in my daughter's wallets, because I simply know that's better than my iCloud account or my Flickr account. I think we kind of learned our lesson in a way that the internet gives us distribution, but it doesn't give us anything eternal. It is actually absolutely ephemeral, and that's why we have things like the Wayback Machine to try to remember projects that we built in the 90s. And you're right. So I like both vectors that you're touching on there. One of which is, kind of forcing the hand or limiting the output of an unlimited, generative source, forcing the addition model in a way, which I think has really interesting parallels, to the art world. When somebody ever asks me, how do I know, how can I say that there is digital scarcity, or that that scarce digital object has any value, I say, well, how can you say that artificially limited Warhol print has any value? It is artificial scarcity in exactly the same way, in fact. And so yes, by sort of doing that, you create not only value but community in a way as well. So but also there is that notion that you're putting it somewhere that you can bet that it will be tomorrow. Now we can talk about IPFS and those types of things, but the blockchain itself will certainly outlive us, and I think that's an important concept that people don't think hard enough about. But let me ask you this then, in that context, why Artblocks? What did Artblocks add to this that was missing for you before you created it?
Well, Artblocks was originally just something for me to use as a tool for making art in a way that I couldn't make it before. So, you know, my wife and I always talk about there's so many things in our lives that just don't exist that we need to create them ourselves. And this is just something that I thought would be a really cool way for me to create my art. And then partway through the process, I had children and I realized I don't have time to create art, and then decided that it would actually be really fun to create this because it was interesting to me that I thought that other artists would be interested in the premise of putting your art on chain and being able to, like, you know, watch the birth of the art be minted by your collectors on demand. It was actually a 4-year process where I would approach artists and either I'd get no response or the response would be like, dude, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, trying to explain to someone, trying to find the Venn diagram of like a generative artist, which are pretty rare in the whole scheme of things, and someone that understood blockchain in 2017 and 2018, it was like 2 people. And even they were overwhelmed with kind of like the complexity of what an Artblocks smart contract was and like what it meant to interact with it. So, you know, I think that there is a lot of chance that goes into success, and I feel very lucky about like when Artblocks was deployed. You know, like a lot of things, you know, people want to say, oh man, you really nailed the timing on that. Well, no, it was a total accident. Like it wasn't really intentional to like land or deploy Artblocks. In fact, I often joke about the fact that Top Shot, there was this project called Top Shot by Dapper Labs that I got so involved with that it actually delayed the launch of Artblocks by 6 months, because I was just literally trading $1 moments with hundreds of people to build collections for a while. But when Artblocks was launched, it just happened to be at this time when people were starting to come back around and realize the beautiful implications of what, you know, even the slow times of 2018, 2019 had meant within the NFT space, what the implications of people setting CryptoPunks as their PFPs were, what the implications of secondary market royalties were. Alongside that, there was a lot of debate about what IPFS was and what immutability was. You know, autoglyphs were the first to really just put everything on chain, and I think found incredible amount of success with this concept of minting on demand. Avastars followed after that with like a really brilliant concept of putting art on chain, and I think that by the time Artblocks was there to launch, more people understood what an NFT was. I didn't have to, you know, I used to try to pitch Artblocks to an artist, I had to start with like mining and like what a decentralized ledger was. Like I really had to begin from the very beginning. Now you know, I got to skip all that and be like, well, yeah, NFTs, and yeah, it still required a little bit of education, but there was ways for them to learn about it. And so the conversation became a lot easier. So all of these things kind of came together, also very low gas, also many, many years in this space, supporting newcomers and supporting people in this space, right? And that's something that people take for granted. People are always asking, like, how do I get in on this? And my initial response to anybody that says the words, how do I get in on this, is like, I don't react well to people literally saying those words, but it happens more often than you think. But, you know, it's just immersion and being there for people and helping people and like understanding where people are coming from and putting yourself in people's shoes. Has a lot to do with like the early success of Artblocks too. There was not very many people in this community, and during that 3-year time between 2017 and 2020, the Artblocks launch, I feel like I got to know a significant majority of the people that were participating in this space, and as a result, those people at least were willing to lend an ear to what I was building, and that coupled with, you know, artists starting to kind of like be like, oh, there's something here, and some brilliant works that came out of Artblocks in the first few months really are what put Artblocks on the map, on the radar for NFTs in general.
Yeah, and I think it's clear that exactly who you are and the time that you spent and the work that you did is a big part of that. I mean, it makes me think of hearing Chris Haka say, "I'm lucky, but it's not an accident." And I think that I'm sure that applies to you. I think it applies to me, and I'll tell Mo it applies to him as well, right? You know, we've been in the right place at the right time, but we also, you know, put in the right work and you know, with a high level of integrity and, you know, and et cetera. And I'm curious, you know, for you personally, Erick, I mean, a question I'm genuinely curious about is, like, you know, you strike me as quite an idealistic person, but also, you know, incredibly open. Like you mentioned, you know, being a part of these communities. I know you're a big part of the CryptoPunks community, and that's a lot of what, you know, in those early learnings and sort of feeling the space, which I think is what you're describing, what you did. But I'm curious, where does your idealism come from? Do you think in your upbringing, and what would you describe as your idealistic orientation toward the space, and specifically Artblocks?
I mean, I have no idea if there's any particular source of idealism other than I was very, very privileged to get to travel a lot as a kid and get to know a lot of cultures and understand the differences between a lot of humans. There is just so many nuances there that different cultures thrive and also struggle with, that as you get to know more and more people all over the world. And then, then later I started this business in the ceramic tile world where I had to interact with people from all over the world, but then also had to interact with people here in Houston and, make sure that I could understand and empathize with what, why designers and architects needed what they needed and what it took to make them, satisfied, not just with the product, but also with the experience. And, all of those things kind of gave me a lot of conviction in, number one, I think I understand people. I really think that I can put myself in people's shoes and understand why people act the way they act. And I think that conviction led towards, kind of this sense of idealism.
Got it. And what when you're describing, Artblocks to an artist, who you would like to have join, and I know that's it's well known enough at this point that that's a different conversation than it used to be, but I'm curious, what are the differentiators that you talk about, the ones that are important to you? Sort of, again, there was why Artblocks at the beginning, and then why Artblocks today. What differentiates Artblocks, from the rest of the world, and how important are curation and governance in that?
Well, I think a really wonderful example is we had an event in New York a couple weeks ago where artwork was shown on a 3-story screen, and we've been so strict at Artblocks with the concept of dependencies, what's allowed on the platform, and then more importantly, I think the fact that we require artists to make stuff that's resolution agnostic. And oftentimes that felt like a very forward-thinking thing, like, oh yeah, in 20 years we're going to have 64K screens, and we really need the art to be like full resolution at those screens. And I'll be honest, like I did not foresee a lot of like this intense requirement of resolution agnosticism actually coming into play so soon. Well, all of a sudden, we're at Samsung and there's these 3-story screens, and all of a sudden you look back and you're standing this close to the screen and you're looking at an artwork from Artblocks with like no upsampling, at full resolution at that scale, and realize, okay, like this is part of that permanence conversation that we're having earlier, right? Like it's one thing to have permanence as a JPEG or as a animated GIF, but it's another thing to have permanence and be able to view and experience that in its full glory whenever the time comes. And again, I thought it would be far into the future, and really it just happened a couple weeks ago, where like that resolution agnosticism, I believe, is what caused people to have such incredible reactions to viewing the outputs on that screen. I mean, I was on a panel in front of this screen and I literally couldn't stop turning around and looking at art that I have now seen not hundreds of times, but thousands of times. Like I have seen every work on Artblocks at this point, like thousands of times. And somehow I was still just completely blown away by the experience of having it be, bigger than life behind me. And so that's one thing that I think really kind of stands out, and something that is maybe just a indication of just how important having like a very solid and strong foundation and vision for what your product is, and then also working with just an incredible group of people that share that ambition and that foundation with you. Because Artblocks would not be here today if it wasn't for the incredible people that I get to work with every day on the team. Like it would not be here today if it wasn't for the artists, and it wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the collectors. And you have these 3 parties that are all, they all have their like needs and their goals, but like ultimately this end goal is to create this like permanent, immutable art for the ages and to represent the best artists and to represent the best art. And I think that the conviction, for example, with resolution agnosticism is just one example of like not wavering, sticking to that plan, and it really kind of paying off. And then another one just kind of is this, idea that art for the sake of art itself does actually have a home in crypto, and does actually have a home in the NFT space. And, speculation completely overran Artblocks. And a lot of times people will be like, hey, congratulations, like in September, October of last year, like you're killing it. I'm like, no, this is not good for Artblocks. This is not good from a psychological perspective. Like, I want this. I don't want this. That's not healthy. That's not like, nobody thought this was just going to keep going up forever. Like, it was just completely unreasonable to believe that. And, once again, just kind of like being able to stick with that conviction that it's really just about the art. It's really like, hey, if you buy something, it's because you really want it on your wall. Maybe you don't even want it on your wall. You want to participate in that community. You want to participate in that conversation. You want to like pick the artist's brain as to why they came up with this color scheme. And you have more of a presence in that conversation if you own one of these pieces of art. That has really shown during this kind of like intense downturn of the market where, yeah, everything is down. But, the art that we've generated on the platform and the artists that we've cultivated, or the relationships that we've cultivated between the artists and the community have really helped maintain a level of interactivity and a level of like passion and excitement about what we're doing, even while other things kind of fall apart, because there was no utility that was promised other than just enjoy the fucking art. Like, that's really all we're asking you to do is like, do you like it? Cool. Like, let's go talk about it. Let's have a conversation. Let's see them, 7 of them together. Let's look at them on a 3-story screen. Let's, I don't know, send one into space or something. But, and really the people that, we've never ever wanted anybody to get hurt, but we've talked about who are the people that are going to still be here in 6 months or 8 months, the people that, really are just sitting there still sharing their incredible galleries that they're building on gallery.so or Deca or on Cyber. Those people are literally building these beautiful products and having these beautiful conversations. And I think that distinguishes us. I think that separates us from just the rest of the NFT space, and I'm just really proud of that. And again, like, the team has been very patient and to share and also being willing to share that vision with me is just really special, and I just feel very grateful that we're in that position.
In my view, you should be incredibly proud of it. I think that what you're creating, I think that probably in some ways to your chagrin, as you're saying, during the success you were having last year, will have really incredible importance. And like you said, you were the right person at the right moment, creating it. But you've done it in the right way, and you've resisted the opportunity maybe to put it on a rocket ship and said, no, we want to have something that's incredibly, long term here. For me, coming from technology to working with LVMH, I was amazed that they were serious when they told me they took a 100-year time horizon on brands. And I'm thinking, like, what are you talking about? I can't think past 6 months, but I think that I also learned the value of doing that and nurturing a brand for that. One of the trick questions I'd written down, not trick but rhetorical, was, is Artblocks what is it? Is it a platform? Is it a community? Is it a gallery? And I know that that's an unanswerable question. So I'm curious though, what would you like it to be? How would you like history to look at Artblocks? Like, because that speaks a bit to ambition as well.
Well, what Artblocks looks like in the future, I have a bunch of ideas and a bunch of exciting things that, kind of we're working towards. But, understand that Artblocks is already dramatically different than what I set out to do. I set out to make an open platform for anybody that could draw a square with code to host that on the blockchain. And it was all about the democratization of art. It was all about inclusivity. Squiggles were $10 when they were released. Like, it really was meant to be this like open art thing. And we achieved that for a little while, but ultimately we ended up getting such high caliber art that it started to feel like a disservice to some of that art to also allow someone to draw a rectangle on a screen. And a lot of that might have come from August and September in that massive kind of like intense period in our space, just because a lot of time, there was a lot of situations there where people might have decided to create an algorithm specifically because they saw a huge opportunity to make money. And we're humans. I don't actually like resent that. It's part of the mechanic of what came together. Now, I think when we talk about a legacy for Artblocks, there's a lot of different things. I mean, who knows what things are going to be like in the future? Ideally, the art is permanent, right? Which means the legacy really depends on the legacy of the Ethereum blockchain, and we really hope that does stay permanent. Just I think for Ledger and Artblocks, I think our interests are very aligned there, and like the durability and the longevity of the blockchain in general. But if you just take a step aside and realize how many artists have in many cases been able to quit their jobs to dedicate themselves full-time to a type of art that previous to this did not have this level of monetization, right? There is a world where artists train to be sculptors and painters, and then they get out of school and they intern, and then they start making paintings and they start selling their art, and they can actually make a living off of art, although making a living off of art is very difficult to do just in general. It's like very few people can do that. But digital art, and we talk about Artblocks elevating generative art, but I hope that we've played a part in elevating digital art as a whole, not just our weird little nerdy niche of art, which is entirely what I thought it was when I created Artblocks, right? There was a few hundred participants in this space. We've elevated digital art to where digital artists are maybe for the first time able to make a living off of, and people were making a living off of art in 2018 and 19, probably NFT art, but it was different, right? Like Artblocks, Super Rare, Known Origin, a lot of these platforms have elevated this medium of digital art to the point where people can make money off of it and be able to make a living. And so every time I get a message from an artist saying, I just want to let you know I quit my job so I can pursue this full time, that's the legacy. That is literally like, if Artblocks for whatever reason doesn't exist in 10, 15, 20 years, hopefully those artists were able to launch from that point to make what they want to do for a living, what they like to do, what they do for a living, which is make art. And then, the beautiful cultural relics of the NFT space, which is the fact that NFTs enable platforms to provide secondary market royalties from a cultural perspective, because we often talk about that being baked into the NFT, but it's not. Because as much as I appreciate secondary market royalties, I even more appreciate decentralization. So I'm never going to create an NFT that prevents you from transferring it. And the only way to completely circumvent someone from selling NFT to somebody without paying a royalty is to prevent them from transferring it, right? So that would cross the line for me in terms of like decentralization and what the entire ethos of the blockchain revolution is in general. But we have this cultural moment where artists are making secondary market royalties off their art, which doesn't force them to go and make new art, gives them a little bit more breathing room to enjoy and appreciate the relationship they're building with other artists, with the community, with the platforms. We have wonderful relationships with our artists. We are hiring people. We just hired an artistic director that's literally there to coach artists to have a career in art. A lot of these artists never thought that they could have a career in the arts, and now they're seeing that there's a chance that they could, and they're excited about it, but they need help. I need help. We all need help in this space. And so I think really that might be the most exciting part of this is like, how many artists are able to pursue their passions, how many people that work at the Artblocks team that, are just really excited about what we're doing, enabling artists to pursue their passions, enabling the blockchain to create provenance for art, whether you're in the engineering side or the artistic side, or even like from an admin perspective, people that have been working in corporate their whole lives and seeing this new community, this new way that companies come together. I think it's just giving a nice breath of fresh air to a lot of different people. And to me, that would be an indication of success, is like there's a lot more happy people on this planet than there were before Artblocks existed. And I couldn't be, I couldn't ask for more.
Well, let's wrap up. But we couldn't really wrap up without speaking about you as an artist. It's, you referred to, the creation of this and as creation of Artblocks is a platform to do what you were trying to do as an artist, and you reference Squiggles, but I get the feeling that you're not spending a ton of your personal time creating art these days, Erick. And well, by the way, thank you for what you've done on both fronts. But where do you see yourself, as an artist versus a creator of Artblocks? And where do you want to see yourself over time? Do you see yourself, creating more? And how do you deal with that as personal identity?
I spent my whole life coming up with really ridiculous and crazy ideas, and I think it's really dangerous that one of my crazy ideas actually materialized and was validated, because it gives me a lot more confidence in some of the stuff, not only the stuff that I've thought through in the past that I either didn't have the financial resources or just like the team resources to execute, but stuff that's kind of come into my mind since the launch of Artblocks. So, my career as an artist is really important and special to me. A year and a half ago, I would never have thought that I would be saying my career as an artist. Leslie Silverman introduced me at CES this year as an artist. That was the first time I was kind of publicly, formally introduced as an artist. It was just like mind blowing. I just remember the moment as if it was yesterday. I remember I've been making kind of like artsy, sculptural works for 10 years now. And I remember, approaching galleries and being told, this isn't art, this is craft, this is, hobby, but this isn't art, and that's okay. I'm fully aware that of what it means to be in this gallery space and in the art world. I'm very serious about what potentially could happen as an artistic career for me, because to me, what I want to be able to express myself. And so the Chromie Squiggle allowed me to express a lot to a lot of people in a very meaningful way, and I have a lot more to say and a lot more to do in this world, and this is giving me an opportunity to really hopefully make an impact, not just in artists' lives, not just in our teams' lives, not just in collectors' lives, but just hopefully as this world evolves and this space evolves, maybe it gives me a voice to make changes and positive changes in the world as a whole. So my career as an artist will be focused on that. Will be focused on hopefully getting a bigger voice, a bigger platform in this world to speak. And I'm actually working on a project finally for the first time. I'm really excited about it. Hopefully I can get it done in time. We'll see. I'm working on it with my wife. She's an architect, and I'm working on something that's actually has an architectural quality to it. So her and I are kind of passing ideas back and forth. So it's really been special. She's been so supportive for me in this whole time, and for her to actually get to interact on a work is really special. And then as far as Artblocks is concerned, that is actually the biggest platform in terms of my voice and what I can make an impact in people's lives at this point. And I would like to continue, nurturing that and developing that into something that can be as big as it can possibly be. If I can touch more people's lives with the technology, not just the technology, but the vision behind the technology, that we've kind of, not just me anymore, now there's 30 plus of us and growing, have come together to celebrate, then I'll be very proud and happy. And so as we continue to evolve what Artblocks does and what Artblocks means, as we get into the concepts of generative manufacturing and on-demand immersive interactive experiences in person, and really find ways to interact with not just the crypto collector, not just the person that made a bunch of money on Bored Apes to be able to afford to buy some of these NFTs, which is obviously, these are very important people and part of our career, not just the very wealthy traditional art world person that can kind of enter this space, but the everyday person. I would love to be able to serve them and provide technology that somehow benefits them and makes their life a little bit better as well. So we'll see where things go, but there's been a lot of validation in the last, almost more validation than I know what to do with in the last 15 months. And again, I work with an incredible group of people, and that group of people is incredibly motivating. And we work under a culture where it just looks like it's going to be wonderful wherever we go from here.
Well, and really, I want to underline that too, and thank you for what you do to the culture. You mentioned earlier the secondary and the royalties, and you mentioned the fact that really it is a bit of an honor system, right? If we're honest about it. But what we've done is we've created a culture, around it, and I think that's incredibly important, to create a culture where where we say yes, this type of value to artists is important to us. as a culture, because it makes the whole scene more vibrant. And I think you can point to many times, at least in the scenes that I've been a part of, whether it's punk rock or skateboarding or whatever. I think about how Jake Phelps at Thrasher kept the entire world of skateboarding honest for 25 years, right? Because if a clown came in, he shut him down hard, right? And I would say don't under state the value that you and Artblocks have here, even if it's just through leadership and influence, right? And I really personally hope that you and that team continue to lead in the way that you are, in a way that I think you guys have proven that you have a very steady hand, and that you're going you're sort of committed to something that's real and it's going to be long term, and it gives us all a lot of inspiration, and also confidence to participate as collectors and community members and Discord members, etc. Just to close, you've had some really thoughtful advice for people over the past week on Twitter, in terms of what to do at this moment and what not to do. Maybe before we leave, can you summarize what it is you were telling to people in that tweet thread, and what advice you'd have for other people who are kind of wondering how they should be orienting themselves at this particular moment in crypto history?
Well, it was two parts. One of them was very much focused on security, and the other one was very much focused on investing and buying and what feels right. And bottom line, from a security perspective, it's we don't need our private keys. We don't need our seed phrases, but very rarely. I was not exaggerating. I have only needed them a handful of times in 5 years in this space. And you'll find that you need them even less if you get a hardware wallet. So I'm not trying to be an advertisement for you here, but I'm just it's just the reality is once you have a hardware wallet, you actually never need them again, right? If you have a new computer, you'll install MetaMask on there, it'll generate some random wallet for you, but your important stuff is on something that you don't need to put a new seed phrase on, right? So from that perspective, putting, I actually got a little bit beat up from people by saying to put something in a safe deposit box. If you have very valuable NFT assets, maybe don't put them all in a safe deposit box with a seed phrase that doesn't have a 25th word, or that the seed phrase is all in the same safe deposit box. But once you get to a point of value in your NFTs, you should be more prudent about how you handle it. But for the person that, and this was all triggered because multiple people in the same week told me they were fished out of their Squiggle, and there's nothing more crushing for me than when someone gets fished out of a Squiggle. Obviously, I hate to see people losing even Bored Apes, but these are people that I gifted them to, and they were so excited to get them, and so the amount of pain that it must take for that person to reach out and be like, hey, by the way, I'm just letting you know so you don't think I'm flipping it, which is kind of fair too, right? Because if I see it for sale, I'd be like, oh man, I gifted you that. But in reality, it's because you were fished out of it, which is really kind of a bummer and really sad. So the people that have a Squiggle or a couple doodles or a couple random NFTs, I think it's perfectly fine to put your seed phrase in a safe deposit box, put that wallet onto a ledger, and then just feel very confident and comfortable operating in the space with knowing that nobody can actually scam you out of your stuff unless you send it to them. The other side of it is in what to invest in and what to buy. I think if you look at this purely as an investment, you might as well go to Vegas, or at least feel like you're in Vegas. And there's nothing wrong with investments. There's nothing wrong with speculation, but treat it as such. And when your speculation does not go in your favor, the only person that you should blame is yourself. Unless you get rugged by an organization. That's something that happens in our space. It's really disappointing, and it happens way too often. But on the contrary, if you buy something purely because you like it, then I'll give you a perfect example. One of my favorite works of Artblocks of all time is this piece called Meridian by Matt Delorier. And I missed the mint. I was in a meeting. I was really upset about it. And then I watched the prices go from the mint price, which was 5 ETH, up and up and up. And I was like, okay, this is maybe going to be a Fidenza, and it's going to be up over 100 ETH, right? And so at 22 ETH, I bought one. I bought it at 22 ETH because I knew I wouldn't be able to afford it at 100 ETH. And so, yeah, there's a chance that it was going to go back down, but there was also a chance that it was going to go back up. So I bought it at a high price to hedge against it continuing to go up. But the fact that it went down, as did everything else in this space, was not impactful to me, because what mattered is that I owned the artwork, because I loved the artwork and I wanted to own it. And I think a lot of people think that when we say these things, they're like, yeah, whatever, you know the true nature of the space. No, you make what you want of this space. The true nature of the space is actually your nature as a human being. So you cannot question whether I actually wanted to own that Meridian for the sake of owning it, or whether I wanted to own it for the sake of speculation. And the 2,600 Artblocks NFTs in a secure vault that I have are probably indicative of the fact that I have no intention of selling it anytime soon, but that's sometimes not enough to make people understand that. I would love for people to just take a step back and put themselves in the shoes of an imaginary person that is purchasing stuff because they want to participate in it. And yeah, investment is not out of the question. People do purchase art to not throw money away. But a lot of art in the traditional art world also loses its value, not because the artist did something wrong, but because there's nobody there to buy it in 5 years or 10 years. That artist's career may not have gone where it needed to go. That's part of buying art. But if you buy the art because you love the art, you actually don't have to worry about those things. So, think about what you want to be sitting there worrying about. Do you want to be sitting there worrying about the floor on OpenSea? Or do you want to be sitting there worrying about someone coming out with a damn good enough screen to display the work so that you can live with it in your house in a way that doesn't feel like you're looking at a TV screen? I'd much rather be worried about that part. I'd much rather have the art, know that I own the art, know that whether it's this year or next year or in 5 years, there will be a device that's going to adequately display it. That is my biggest concern when I'm buying a piece of art, and also potentially losing out on being able to buy it because the price goes up too high. And if you really are buying for that reason, and to curate galleries and to put together really beautiful exhibitions of the art, then yeah, it hurts when the value goes down, but it doesn't hurt for the same reasons. It just hurts because, and I've said this before, the only reason that it hurt that Meridian went down in value is because I could have owned 4 of them, right? Not because of it literally is a matter maybe of pure selfish greed. That is why I was upset with the value going down, because I could have owned more of them for the amount of money that I spent, not because, oh man, I made some kind of crypto speculative move and,
opportunity cost, not absolute value.
Absolutely. Okay, that's a really good way to put it. Yeah. So anyways, that's kind of where I'm at right now, and I hope that people can just take a moment to absorb that.
Eric, I'm right there with you. It's really, really a pleasure. Thank you so much for giving us your time, and really for within everything else that you're doing and doing with the team. I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us and talk to the audience about this. I really, sincerely hope that this pushes more people down this rabbit hole that I've followed you into in some way. It's come on in, the water's fine. It's really, really nice. And like I said at the beginning, it what you're talking about now reminds me. I have 7-inches that I bought, 7-inch records I bought when I was in high school that now have huge value on Discogs. I bought them because I like the music. I didn't buy them because I thought someday they're going to have huge value on Discogs. That's a nice side effect. But being a part of the movement, being a part of the scene, enjoying the art, enjoying the culture was why I was there. And the fact that I'm almost 50 years old and get to feel that feeling still is, I feel like the luckiest guy on the planet. And really, to be able to discuss these things with you, I only wish that we had 6 hours to do it. So maybe sometime we figure that one out too. But I'll take what I can get for now. So thank you so much for your time and for being with us.
Thank you, man. Thank you for your time and for everything that you guys do for the space. It can't go unnoticed that people can actually live a more sane and comfortable and confident life if they just stick their stuff onto a damn hardware wallet. It just would make everybody's life. It would make my life easier too, right? So I'm being selfish. Stick your stuff on a hardware wallet. Just do it. It's such a relief. It's a pain in the ass if you have a lot of stuff to transfer it and it costs you money, but just do it, man. And thank you all for everything that you're doing towards that goal. It's really important.
I appreciate it. We're all in it together. I can't wait, 15 years from now to look back on this moment and think about what we were creating. I'm curious how many of these, things we're imagining in our heads are going to have come true by then.
We'll see.
All right, man. I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the time.
That's it. As expected, a pretty inspiring conversation between Snowfro and Ian. If you want to learn more about generative art and Artblocks, be sure to check out Ledger Academy because we have a lot of content that's covering these fascinating topics. And if you haven't already subscribed to the show, please hit that subscribe button before you go to help us help you get more of this. This was On the Ledger from Paris with your host Moul Sayed. Till next time, take care. Au revoir. This content is provided for informational purposes only and is the sole expression of our opinion and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. Do your own research. Any loss or profit is your sole responsibility. Stay safe.